Welcome to Reach Your Dew Point, the podcast that explores what it takes to make your next move, whether you're thinking about starting a business, changing careers, or achieving something you've been dreaming about. I'm your host, Roy Atkinson. We'll be sharing stories from many who have found their own dew point and eliminated the barriers to their success. Listen up. You'll learn something that will help you reach your dew point. For this episode, I interviewed David V. Sanker, Ph.D. Prior to a career in patent law, he earned his doctorate in mathematics, worked as a software engineer developing large-scale data processing applications, and was an assistant professor of mathematics at Holy Names College. Drawing on 12 years of experience in software development and database architecture, David works with clients to build strong patent portfolios in a variety of areas, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and data visualization software. As AI tools have become widely available, inventions that use AI have become an increasing portion of his work, including inventions in industrial automation and life sciences. In 1978, David gained notoriety for memorizing the value of pi to 10,000 digits. David, welcome to Reach Your Dew Point.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We have talked a little bit, so you know what the concept of the dew point is, and I know that you have several in your life, which is why you're here. So tell us about your first one. What was the first dew point, that decision point that you reached that changed things for you?
And of course, there's probably some early in my life, but I think that the one that's most critical here occurred when I was in graduate school. I had gone to Berkeley to study mathematics. I was going to get my Ph.D. And the reason I had gone there was because I wanted to get my degree and return to Oregon, where I grew up, and I wanted to be a professor of mathematics at Oregon State University. That was my plan. And it's like, I knew what I wanted to do. And the reason for that is when I grew up there, I knew some of the people there at the University of Oregon State University, and that's where I wanted to go. So my work in graduate school at Berkeley was okay at the outset, but doing original research can be very tricky, and it isn't always very easy to figure out what to do. And so I was really floundering a lot and not really knowing what I should work on, because my thesis advisor didn't have a specific topic for me. And so I was trying to find a topic. And in the area of mathematics, I mean, you actually have to prove something, because if you just do research and don't end up with a proof of something, you have nothing. You have no work. Unlike other areas where if you just do some research, you publish your research, that works. Not in mathematics. You actually have to prove something. So I really was not making very much progress. I was spending time also trying to figure out like doing programming. I also considered transferring to another school. Wasn't going for very well. I considered secondary teaching, mathematics at a high school level. Not doing very well. So the dew point came when I learned that there was an opening at Oregon State University, because the professor that I had met some years earlier was retiring. So the professor in my area was retiring, and they were hiring somebody new. At that point, it became pretty important to me, because it's like I realized that I had one chance of actually getting what I wanted, and therefore I had to make this work. Okay, and so once that happened, it's like, okay, no more playing around with figuring about programming, no more, doing all these other things. It's like, I've got to focus on this one thing. And so even though I had a sort of an idea that I thought, I had sort of worked on a little bit, I said, okay, this is my best shot at it. I have to work on that. I managed to get work with a professor who had a research grant, so that I didn't have any teaching duties that semester. And I went to the office, and I was working, 12 plus hours every day doing my research to try to get this done. And after a couple of months of that, I actually did get the result that I needed. So with the appropriate incentive, I worked hard enough, and I actually achieved what my goal was. So I completed my research and ended up getting my degree. I told you earlier that the humorous thing is that after I completed the research, I discovered that actually they were already going to hire somebody else at Oregon State. So I actually didn't have a chance of getting it. Fortunately, I didn't know that, because I needed that incentive to get my work done. And so it was a great thing, and I'm glad that the circumstances came around so that it caused me to do what I needed to get done. I mean, psychologically, it was difficult because it was not an easy thing to do. It took hard work, and I had to be working at it every single day in order to make it happen. It was a good result. Hard to do.
Now you've found out that the position that you thought might be open at Oregon State was not open. Now you have a decision to make again. And so what happens at that point? What was going through your mind, and what direction did you decide to go in?
Right. So considering that I had just spent 6 years working for a degree to work in academia in mathematics, it made sense to continue doing that. I got a job working as a professor of mathematics at a small liberal arts college in Oakland, California, which is next to Berkeley. So, but the school did not pay very well compared to the cost of living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, the San Francisco Bay Area is one of the highest cost of living places there, and wasn't being paid very well. And so even though it was an okay job, it was not practical as a very long-term solution. So after a couple of years of not finding other academic positions, then I had the next point. This one is in a simpler. This due point was that, okay, this isn't going to work. I've got to find something else. So it psychologically was easier in the sense that I don't really have a choice. It's like I've got to be going on to something different. And so if academia is not working, what other options are there? And so I was investigating the full gamut of possible alternative career directions, which included things from I interviewed with financial firms for doing market research for stock. Actually, interviewed for that. When I discovered that they would want me to move to New York City, it turned out not to be a very good option. It's like, okay, I'm not going to move to New York City. So it's like, okay, well, it was a good thought. But there are also financial planning, considering secondary teaching, and then possibly getting going back to school in computer science. But the other option, which turned out to be the best one, which was going into software development. I had some experience with that, and so then ended up getting an opportunity to work at a startup company doing software development, which turned out to be a great opportunity for me. It was definitely a great move. It took a lot of work to get there, just because it's not like I had a degree in computer science or tangible evidence of things. The only thing I had tangible was the class that I took that I did pretty well in. So it was a lot of work, but it was kind of simple psychologically, difficult just in terms of amount of looking at all of the options. I was looking at hundreds of possible job options. So then I did that for about 12 years.
That's a good stretch of time that you did software development. So
yeah.
And did you enjoy that work? Did you like?
I really did. I think that was it. I really enjoyed writing software and seeing it in production doing good things for people. I mean, it's just like, it's actually kind of neat to when you develop something that is actually working to achieve something for people. One thing that made it work pretty well too was about midway through there was an opportunity to start a brand new. We were rebuilding the system from scratch, and so it was an opportunity to really sort of like, in a sense, it was almost like a job change, because it's like, it was kind of the same field, but we're building something new from scratch with a whole new set of requirements. And that was a great opportunity. So, although it was one span of time for one company, it's kind of like a lot of the initial work, and then there's a second part, which was building something completely new. And I'm very happy with that work.
So you said you did that for 12 years. So we know you moved on from that. And what was going on at that point that made you start thinking about it, or did it just hit you like a flash? What was going on at that point before you made the next change?
It was a little bit slower, but definitely not a flash. But it was sort of, for me, after 12 years of this, I got to the point where I felt that I was not actually growing in any way, intellectually. It's like, okay, I was being paid reasonably well, pretty comfortable. And I was quite good at what I was doing. And in a sense, maybe I had too high of an opinion of how I was doing it. It felt too easy for me. And I said, when it feels too easy, you're definitely not making any progress. And so I just had the sense that I really should be moving on to something new. And it really started in that sense, that it's like, what is that new thing possibly going to be? And it really started off at an abstract level. And so, I recognized I really need to do this. And then I, imagined things like, okay, well, I could start a business for myself. And the business for myself, I was thinking, would have been along the similar lines of what the work I was doing, but it would be my own business. And there, the new part would really be just running a business, and that part would be new, as opposed to the new new technology or new subject matter. And I was sort of a little bit interested in that, and some of my colleagues and I were seriously considering that. I actually incorporated a business to do that, and it was possible. It was going to be tough. It was possible, but it would have been tough. And the other thing that came up is, in that time frame, a couple of things happened that introduced me to patent law. And one of those was that the company I was working for the first time ever, actually brought in a patent attorney and gave us a talk about that. And we were considering patenting some things. And then, as part of my incorporation process, I had also met with another attorney who happened to be my neighbor. So I was kind of getting some exposure to the law in that way. And so that also seemed interesting. So it was like, okay, so start a new business on my own, or I could go to law school and pursue patent law. Both relatively good options, but the issue again was that psychologically, it's kind of difficult to make a transition when you have a pretty comfortable living. It's like, okay, this is pretty easy. I can just go into the job every day. I can do this, make a relatively good living. And so it's like there's not enough impetus to actually move on. And so and I think this is probably, I don't know, I assume it's probably true of other people too, but it's like sometimes these psychological hurdles are very difficult to get over. It's like, yes, I completely recognize I needed to do something new. It's like, I don't want to be continuing to do this for the next 20 or 30 years, but it was still hard to get over that hurdle. And in a sense, a fortunate thing occurred, which was that the company I was working for was sold to our arch competitor. And so it was that point that I said, and I even wrote down on my personal journal that, no longer a status quo. You got to move on. And so that was enough to push me to say, okay, I've got to make a decision right now. Which way am I going to go? And in that process, I said, okay, I could either start on my own business, which would be, then it'd be more of a business venture, not as much new in terms of the subject matter, or I could go to law school and pursue that. And, I between those two, I said, I think I'll grow more if I go to law school and study patent law and go in that route. So I did that. I mean, of course, with the timing of law school, I had to prepare for that, and take the LSAT and, other things and do some reading and other stuff. And so that's what I did. And, that wasn't easy either, because going to law school means giving up on your salary and having to live off of savings for a few years. So it burned through all of my savings to get through law school. But I did that. And I've got a good job with it. I'm continuing to work at now, and it's good, and continue to do this. So, but I needed that, and I needed that impetus that it's like, okay, the company is sold. You're no longer it's no longer the status quo. So I think, in summary, for me, the first change and the third one, both, it's like I needed an external force to say, you've got to do this now. The one in the middle was psychologically easier, because it was just like it was already clear what had to happen. So I think the biggest part is the psychological hurdle, particularly if what you're doing right now is comfortable. If what you're doing right now, if you're in a desperate situation right now, there's clearly no decision. You just do. You do it right now. Whereas if you're sort of in a pseudo comfort zone, it's harder to get yourself to do. Even if you're completely aware of what you need to be doing, it's harder to do it.
In light of what you just said about, that feeling going along, it's easy to do, you have a position, you're being paid for, and so forth and so on. But earlier on, when you were talking about your mathematical schooling and so forth, you realized at some point that it felt like it was too easy and you weren't going to develop if you kept doing what you were doing. So it's an interesting contrast between those two statements that you made. And I guess it really depends on the context, how much of that internal feeling of wanting to develop more and feeling like you're not going to develop. And another person who I interviewed for the podcast said that her particular decision to move on came when she looked down the salary road and knew exactly what she would be making in 37 years when she retired, and said, okay, let's not continue down that road. Let's find something else. So the internal and external motivation is really one of the fascinating things I find about this particular subject. So now
right.
you're working with a patent attorney firm, and which sounds pretty exciting. And tell us a little bit about that work and how it exposes you to ideas, and I'm sure that you get to see some pretty fascinating stuff and look at the world in a slightly different way from what most of us are used to. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's interesting. I just bring that up because there's actually sort of another transition even within the firm I could even bring up. So within patent law, of course, our firm does all sorts of law. I just happen to be working in patent law. And initially, I thought, I'll do patent litigation. And one of the things that's useful about that is then it's like, each new patent litigation is going to deal with different technology. And that's the part that really interests me. So it's like, litigating, some semiconductor devices today, and tomorrow it's a software user interface, and the next day it's, something else completely different. And that's the part that really interested me. And so, at my initial part of my career, I was focused on litigation, but always doing some work in what we call patent prosecution, which is working with the United States Patents Office to secure new patent rights for new applications, and negotiate with the examiners to get the applications right. I worked in mostly patent litigation for several years, about four or 5 years, and then have focused on patent prosecution since then for the last 10 years. I don't know. Something like that, and even the patent prosecution work is pretty interesting in the sense that we're doing new technology, not quite as diverse as litigation. It's still working mostly for a few companies, but fairly diverse within that area. Learn about lots of new patent applications are using artificial intelligence in one way or another. So I get to study more about that. And figure out, well, how's that going? And so I do get to continue learning, and also one of my clients, I deal with database technology and database work all the time, and so my experience in software development is extremely useful and valuable. That most of my colleagues don't have that sort of experience. So it's something that writing a SQL query, it's like, while doing my work in software development, I was, how many thousands of SQL queries did I write? I mean, it's like, that's just, easy. Whereas other people, it's like, okay, not quite as clear. And actually, an interesting point there is like, okay, so what caused me to transition from mostly litigation to mostly exclusively patent prosecution? That was kind of an interesting transition too, because I could always do both, and it actually, as it turned out, our practice group leader, who always thought, it's like, he should be doing patent prosecution work. Why is he doing this litigation stuff? And it just took me a little bit longer to figure that out. And that one came basically during a litigation that I was on that, it was trying to kill me. It was throughout my entire work career and school career, I had never done an all-nighter. That's not a good thing to do. During this particular period of 2 months on this litigation, I did 5 all-nighters as well as many nearly all-nighters, and it was like, I said, I can't do that. That doesn't make sense. I went into my practice group leader and said, you know what? I think enough of that. I think I'll do patent prosecution work. I like that, and that was a good move, because I'm much better at working at understanding the technology and securing patent rights than being just a litigator where you're arguing things. So I think that was a very good transition. That sort of, it's something I really probably hadn't thought enough about. I should have done that earlier. That's one that perhaps you're talking about, some things occurring in a flash. That sort of did, is like, after a couple months of that, is that this is not working for me, and I just had to make that change. And it's okay, because I had always been doing that work. It was pretty easy to make that change. And doing patent prosecution work continues to be good. See lots of new inventions all the time, and that's great. I like to work with the inventors, building up their ideas and securing patent rights for people.
Many of us who in the technical fields have looked at various patent, diagrams and documentation from time to time and said, "Oh, glad somebody else is doing that." So yeah, I appreciate what you do.
And some parts of it, I actually try to make, explain things in as simple and clear a way as possible, because ultimately you're making documents that are supposed to be read by people. So if people are looking at something and say, I have no clue what that says, then you probably actually haven't done a good job. And there's a lot of that out there. I might say the majority. I try to figure out, okay, well, we've got an invention. How can I best illustrate what it's doing? And I tell the associates that I work with, I said, okay, this is your opportunity to be artistically creative. It's like, how are you going to illustrate this? Whatever. I have no preconceived notions. Do whatever you can think of. And also try to avoid. I mean, there's some people tend to use relatively legalistic, stilted language, which is not good, and it's neither required nor helpful. And the top legal scholars talk about legal writing in plain English, and I'm completely on board with that. And so I work very hard to that and help train the associates that I'm working with to do that, because it shouldn't be complicated to read things, and you don't need legalistic words to create something that's good. In fact, I think legalisms detract from quality work.
Well, as the party of the first part, I wholeheartedly agree with that. and thank you for saying that, because that ties back very nicely to a previous episode where I was interviewing someone who specializes in plain, clear language. So there you go. It's a wonderful thing.
I favor that. Yeah, I remember probably a lot of your listeners may be familiar with the very classic book by Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, which that little book is probably got to be one of the most valuable things there is. And just like, okay, let's just read, very simple concepts. I'm full believer in that. And one of these legal scholars actually wrote a book kind of along those lines and very similar, but the elements of legal style. And very similar concepts, and just as applied specifically to law, and did a very good job of it.
That wraps up your changes, or are there more in the offing? What are you thinking about now? And then I have one more question for you.
Yeah. There's definitely more coming up, but I'll be continuing my current work for a indefinite future. But I'm already in the planning for the next stage. But I think I've learned enough from the first couple of transitions that I'm better prepared to figure out how to make the next one. So the next one's still in the works.
Excellent, and that's a great place to leave our listeners. And while they think about their next 2 point, or as they listen to you and learn from the transitions that you've made, David, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I think you're conceptually brought up a very important concept of the dew point, and I love the name that you have chosen to describe it, because I think it's very simple and very accurate, and I like that.
Thank you so much, David. Remember that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spreaker, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. And you can also follow us on Twitter at DewPoint1. I'm Roy Atkinson. See you next time on Reach Your Dew Point.